August 30th, 1945, Poland. It was a late August day as Janina walked down a dirt country road with the sun beating down her back. She adjusted her apron, dusted off the dirt from her dilapidated shoes, and kept walking down the path. The ground, with its crater-sized holes, looked like the face of the moon. As she surveyed her beloved countryside, the land she grew up in, it was once so green and lush, and now it looked apocalyptic, bare, and hopeless, like living on Mars. She recoiled. This land bore the tragic scars of the devastating war, where bombs fell and left cracks and fissures too deep to fathom, both physically and also spiritually. She steered clear from these holes while trying not to fall inside them. These were the last days of World War II, and her hometown of Przemyśl was devastated. She thought back to those fateful first days of the war, those years ago, when the Germans forced their way into her home. They ransacked the place, turning it upside down, looking for anything of value. At the end, they took a few trinkets and rolled out her beloved upright piano. The piano itself wasn't very valuable, but to Janina, it was a priceless treasure. Because she poured her heart into it, it's what kept her steady. The notes of Bach and Chopin, especially during those trepidous first days of the war, the uncertainty, the devastation, the fear. The piano somehow steadied her nerves, but now it was gone. So as she walked along this country road, reminiscing about those dark days, and now as the war was about to close, thinking of the hope that could potentially lie ahead, it was no accident that somehow she heard the sound of a piano in this open air. She thought she might be dreaming, so she went closer to where it seemed to be coming from, and it was coming from the train station. She walked closer to the source of the sound and realized that there was a German soldier playing a piano near the train tracks. Obviously, this piano was part of the belongings they had stolen from the people that were now going to be hauled back to some unknown destination. But as she listened and peered closely, she realized that the German soldier was playing her piano, her beloved piano. She was ecstatic, and then suddenly she hatched a plan. She knew she had to get it back. So she waited until the German soldier left, and there was hardly anybody around. She ran back home. She grabbed a good friend who lived down the street, John, a rugged, strong fellow who was up to the task. He said, "Yes, let's go get your piano, Janina." She took her 8-year-old son, and the trio ran off to get the piano. They started pulling this piano across the country road, trying to avoid all those cracks and craters, and they seemed to be doing well. It was a hard road ahead of them, but they were pushing, and everything seemed okay. She finally thought, hope has come back. Life has come back. Yet, suddenly, their jubilation was disturbed when they noticed a plane overhead. This was obviously an enemy plane who had spotted them and was trying now to stop their defiance. What did they do? They kept pushing faster, faster. Suddenly the plane swooped down. It seemed so close to their heads. They threw themselves down at the ground. Janina took her son and stuffed him inside the piano for cover. The plane reappeared, this time with a hailstorm of bullets, which somehow, miraculously, they were able to avoid. Eventually, they rolled the piano to the front of their home and repositioned it back in its rightful place in the living room. And it seemed that none were scathed except for the piano, which suffered a bullet hole through its music desk, but otherwise it was perfectly playable. But this story is not just about the fate of this piano. It's a far bigger story. It's a far bigger question of why people would risk their lives for an instrument, especially when the instrument itself wasn't valuable from a financial standpoint, but its value meant so much to this family that they were able to risk their lives for it. What does this say about the deeper meaning of music in people's lives? What does this say about music as a bridge of hope, especially during tragic times? Join me for episode 3, Music, What Do You Mean? As we explore music, meaning, and other dangerous pursuits. Welcome to Music to Compose You, where the timeless melodies of classical music intertwine with narratives of personal transformation. I'm Margaret Wacyk, a Grammy-nominated concert pianist, author of 2 books, and creator of the Golden Tone Technique piano method. And I'm thrilled to be your host. Join me each week at my Steinway piano on a journey through the symphonies of life. We explore how the power of music shapes our stories, ignites our passions, and leads us towards profound inner growth and physical healing. From the gentle cascades of a Bach prelude to the triumphant crescendo of a Beethoven sonata, each episode will resonate with the melodies of our experiences, inviting you to discover the transformative magic of classical music. Welcome to episode 3 of the Music to Compose You podcast. I'm Margaret Wacyk, and I'm so thrilled that you are with me today. The singer Bono has a quote which says that music can change the world because it could change people. But the question is, how does music actually do that? What is this language that speaks to people universally, and what does it actually mean? Music is a language, and today we are going to take a stab at decoding it. In this episode, which is part 2 of a Passion for Life series, Elevating Above the Ordinary like Beethoven, we will cover some really hot topics. Number 1, music, meaning, and danger. Why some people go to great lengths to protect it. What is it about music? Number 2, how to listen deeper and how that positively impacts everything in our life. We'll actually get some strategies to unlock our ear. Number 3, what is inner listening and why is it so important to tune in? And again, how do we actually do that? And lastly, we will take a foray into the 19th century idea of revelation theory and art. And how and why did Beethoven embrace this? And why is this theory essential for us in these modern times to embrace? So get your seatbelts on. We are going to have a fun ride. Let's start with a question. Are you listening? I mean, are you really listening? Did you know that 85% of what we learn comes from listening? Listening is, in fact, an action verb, even in ancient texts. For instance, in ancient Hebrew, the word Shema is an action verb. It means to listen and obey. So there is that second part to listening. Passive listening doesn't cut it. This is important for us to realize because we listen at a rate of 125 to 250 words per minute, but we think at 1,000 to 3,000 words per minute. So we fill in the blanks in what our ear hears. Listening is so impactful. It's the most important thing to cultivate. And although this is a podcast about music, Listening is way beyond listening to music. It's actually listening to other people. It's listening to ourselves. It's listening to the sounds around us and being aware that everything we hear gets turned into energy our body uses, just like the food we eat. So when we listen to things that lower our energy, like a bag of chips is to eating, we actually right away have a change of mood. It impacts us, it impacts our thoughts. If you've ever felt great and then suddenly you turn on the news and you hear some devastating report and right away your mood shifts to the negative, then you know what I'm talking about. So we need to listen up. Let's talk about 3 ways that listening impacts us. Number 1, relationships. When we truly listen actively, we get on the same page as the people we are talking to, which creates stronger relationships. When we actively listen, our partners in conversation feel heard, which helps to build trust and increases empathy. In fact, it's so easy to talk in a conversation, but the actual listening is where we make the most impact and build trust. How about in the workplace? That's a huge place where active listening will give better overall results because it impacts communication and understanding, and that benefits your team's decision-making abilities. A team that is already communicating well and knows the dynamics, needs, and challenges of the workload can help overcome minor hurdles and work towards the bigger decision and goals. We know that in family relationships, listening is huge. When a child feels heard, or a parent feels understood, or a spouse feels understood and really listened to, that is the bridge of harmony. The importance of listening to ourselves is another big piece of this puzzle. It's what I call tuning in. What does that really entail? It means to listen to the deep voice inside, which can often be cluttered and muted because of all those external noises that are actually the inner voices that are chattering all the time. We have a whole bunch of inner voices. It's really curious. If you stop and you listen, you realize that you actually have a whole cast of characters ranging from the nervous Nelly one, which is always trying to keep you safe and, don't do that and maybe rethink this. There's the saboteur one that is constantly saying you can't do this or must not, or you tried before and it's not going to happen. The voices could be endless. And so it's important to go even deeper inside and tune in to part of you that is the truest self, which is also where your intuition lies, and that inner chatter goes away and you really get to be with yourself. And believe it or not, listening to great music, like the music of Beethoven, for instance, which has an inner wisdom to share, it helps us tune into ourselves. Why is that? Well, because great music is a mirror of our inner soul and spirit. In fact, it acts as a soundboard. Think of all those abstract dots on a piece of music manuscript paper. They are more than a code. They actually have a power to release those places in ourselves that are buried. And we get to also tune in through this abstract language. So the abstract language itself is that vehicle, because where words end, music begins. So it's my hope that this episode will fill in some of the blanks when it comes to listening to great music. And if we're not sure what we're listening to or how to decode this language, we can easily tune out, because if we don't understand it, then it's over our heads, then it's very hard to connect. So it's kind of like when I go to this store, which I love, it's about 30 minutes away. It's called H Mart. It's a Korean grocery store. And the minute I enter it, I feel like I'm in the middle of Korea, which is fascinating. And I love being absorbed in that culture. But I don't understand a thing. When I'm there, I don't understand what people are saying. I don't understand the labels on the different products. It's like I'm a foreigner. But that could also be true of music, especially classical music. When it has no lyrics, it's very difficult to decode what is it really saying. And if you've ever fallen asleep, you know, no judgment, because I've done it too. If you've ever fallen asleep at a classical music concert, then you know that it's really easy to just zone out. So think of this episode as a start to a very basic music appreciation 101 class, but at the same time, it's a bit meatier than that, because we'll be going under the hood of music in the next few episodes to inquire of its meaning and interpret what a composer like Beethoven might be trying to say. Take 2 symphonies and call me in the morning. Those are the words expressed by Elena Manis in her book, The Power of Music. My friend, let me ask you a question. Have you been using the power of music in your health and wellness journey? If not, then there's no better time than now to jump in. Because we live in a modern time that is filled with noise, where finding peace and clarity can sometimes seem impossible. However, by tapping into the notes of classical music and the timeless messages of wisdom found within, we have a powerful transformational tool that we can use today. But you might be thinking, well, classical music has never been my thing. How do I connect to it? How do I listen and actually like it, engage with it, and have it be a reflection of my feelings and emotions? Welcome to the Music to Compose You podcast. Here we connect the dots, bringing together the beautiful masterpieces of classical music, the stories behind the compositions, and the composers that wrote them. The benefits of classical music are sky high. From reducing stress and anxiety to boosting concentration and creativity, classical music harmonizes your mind and body, elevating your everyday experiences. And you can try it right now. Feel the soothing melodies wash over you, improving your mood, enhancing your cognitive abilities, and promoting restful sleep. Let the melodies of Mozart, Beethoven, and Bach be your companions on a journey to wellness. Download Sound Sleep, a collection of soothing piano masterpieces that soothe your nervous system and harmonizes the brain, creating an atmosphere of peace just perfect for bedtime. Try it by going to musictocomposeyou.com, and while you're there, be sure to join the newsletter where I share the latest behind-the-scenes footage of the podcast and access to special events, concerts, and goodies reserved just for subscribers. So thanks so much for being part of the Music to Compose You family. We are embarking on a fun journey. I'm so happy you're here for the ride. Let's let our soul song sing and see what this music reveals to us about ourselves. So in the opening story, you heard about Janina, a 27-year-old mother who had her piano stolen during World War II by the Nazis when they came and they ransacked her house, and it was heartbreaking for her. She was a musician and absolutely clung on to her piano as not only a musical expression, but also as a tool for hope. And the amazing story of how, as the war was coming to an end, she saw it. And it was on its way back on a train to be taken to some unknown location, as were the booty that they had gotten and stolen from all those people. But she managed, under incredibly dangerous conditions, avoiding gunshots from a plane, along with her 8-year-old son and a neighbor who she enlisted for this crazy adventure, but they were able to roll back the piano to her home. The part I didn't tell you is that Janina is my grandmother and the 8-year-old boy is my father. Janina passed away when I was 16, but my dad still talks about this story, obviously. He tells it as if it was the funniest story in the whole world, although I'm sure it must have been terrifying for him. But it has a real place in my heart, and I think about that all the time. One of the things that I inherited from my grandmother, who was very, very much interested in my musical development. Although she was living in Poland and I was mostly living in New Jersey, she was constantly asking and constantly offering advice. And whenever I would visit her in Poland, she would listen to me and then also give me some additional commentary. And one thing she said to me when I was a teenager never left me, because I loved Chopin. And one day I was playing Chopin for her and she said to me, right now you love Chopin because it's so romantic. But one day you will grow to love Bach. And indeed, that was very true. I came to absolutely adore the music of Bach. And so that was almost, I felt like a prophetic thing she said to me. But the whole point of this story is that music meant so much, not only to her, then it also translated into me as something more than maybe the sum of its parts, almost as a survival, like an anthem of the soul for survival. Sometimes people think I'm weird that way. Really, truly, if friendships have gone sour because of comments made about music or not understanding my sensitivity to the sacredness that I hold music to. And I know that this might be a shortcoming for me or something that maybe I inherited through the DNA, but in any case, I looked a little bit further into this because it's interesting that music in historical landscapes meant a lot. Like, for instance, I learned that the fall of the Roman Empire, which seemed impenetrable, right? Like, we all heard about the Roman Empire. That's, beyond powerful. But yet it crumbled and failed. And the first sign that it was being destroyed was when the people started to destroy their own instruments. And I never forgot that story. Of course, I thought it was a correlation because of the importance that music has also in terms of this story, which is a story about ancient China and the emperor, who had a vast expanse, obviously, of territory to be overseeing. And so he had people that worked for him and he would dispatch them, and they had to go and they had to assess the different territories. They didn't have a long time to make these assessments. They had to travel there and they had to quickly see what was on the pulse. How was this particular territory and its society doing? And the way that they would measure the success of a society in ancient China was to go and check on the music they were playing and the way the instruments were tuned. This is taken from a book called The Power of Music, and I will link it in the show notes. And then, of course, the well-known story of the walls of Jericho. This is taken from the Bible, Joshua 6, which talks about the Israelites led by Joshua and how they were preparing to conquer Canaan and take over the walled city of Jericho. And in order to scale and get through these massive walls, God had instructions for this battle, which seemed strange at the time, and it involved sound and music. Number one, they were to march around the city walls in silence for 6 days with only trumpets blowing. Number two, on the seventh day, they were to march around the city 7 times. And then number three, have 7 priests blow their horns while carrying the Ark of the Covenant in front of them, with the Israelites following behind. And then number 4, at Joshua's command, everyone was to shout. The instructions were explicit, and music, frequency, and sound was a big ingredient in that victory. So music, as Plato says, or said, music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. So we look at the classical composers, and certainly music for them seemed like life or death. And as we roll further into our Beethoven series, we will learn that Beethoven had to make a choice between life and death. And when he became deaf, he didn't want to live anymore. And yet it was the music that kept him going. This is also true of Schubert, who was a composer diagnosed with syphilis, only 31 years old. And yet when he learned that he had only about 20 months left to live, he went on such an incredible, heated, obsessive writing of music binge. He was nonstop writing music. In fact, he would go to bed with his glasses on so that when he would wake up, he wouldn't waste a minute. And even on his deathbed, he was writing music to the very, very end. Could music mean more than we realize? Why is it so critical? What did the ancients again know about music that perhaps we've forgotten? Music is heated territory. In fact, I always was amazed in reading the Bible that Satan himself was a fallen angel, and music was what Satan was doing. So, goodness gracious, what does that all mean? Well, let's go a little deeper into the message of today, which is a theory called revelation theory. Now, revelation theory was in the 19th century kind of approach that said that art must rank with science and philosophy as a way of communicating knowledge about reality. This is written by an author, J.W.N. Sullivan, in his book Beethoven and His Spiritual Development. So even in the time of Enlightenment, where it was all about rational and science and being able to measure everything, still people couldn't really measure the impact of music or even understand its significance, because unlike water, food, oxygen, clothing, music is not something we really need for survival, but yet we do. We've been doing music as a species. Humans have been doing music since day one. It's something so innate in us, and yet it's something so unique. So if we dig a little deeper into this idea of revelation theory, that art must rank with science and philosophy as a way of communicating knowledge about reality, then we realize that we should be letting music and the arts in way more, especially in our modern time, because in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years, we've advanced so fast in terms of computers and the digital age and internet. I mean, I remember my kids didn't yet have iPhones. That didn't exist when my kids were born, and that was about 20 years ago. So even just the advancement of like from, no phones to now we have these iPhones, and now we're able to, I mean, these apps could do anything these days. It's just, and now we have AI and all this stuff. So we have so advanced so quickly, but have we also advanced in terms of our souls and in terms of emotionally keeping up with all of this and our new lifestyles, which is mostly in front of screens and Zoom calls and all of this? We need the grounding. I believe we need the grounding, and the music grounds us. If we sit down with a Beethoven symphony, for instance, it's grounding. It's a reset button, and it helps us to integrate all those different parts of ourselves. Beethoven, in a letter, wrote that he knows, quote, that God is nearer to me than to other artists. I associate with him without fear. I have always recognized and understood him and have no fear for my music. It can meet no evil fate. Those who understand it must be freed by it from all the miseries which the others drag about with themselves. Music is the mediator between intellectual and sensual life. Wow, that is one meaty statement right there. In fact, Beethoven is saying himself that this is the grounding music, that when we listen and we understand, and he's also making such a case that it's not coming from him directly, it's coming from another wisdom, a higher wisdom, and he's channeling it. It's incredible. He goes on to say in this letter, music is the one incorporeal entrance into the higher world of knowledge, which comprehends mankind, but which mankind cannot comprehend. Okay, enough talk. We have to feel this. We have to experience this. Let me play you a clip from the slow movement from Beethoven's last symphony, his ninth. That was a performance of the third movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony by Herbert von Karajan conducting the Berlin Philharmonic. I will also play the entire performance at the end of this podcast, but this excerpt is truly luminous. It's as if floating in the clouds. It just transports the spirit. Back to a little bit more about Beethoven and this idea of what he had, the revelation theory of art, because it is evidence of his conception of the function of music. As we know, the classical music composers, they differentiate from a lot of the other types of music, which are more for enjoyment or emotional reasons. This has a function attached to it. And it is a conception which at the time was not consonant. His conception of music as a revelation theory was not consonant with the intellectual outlook of his own time. And indeed, if we think about even the last 3 centuries, the intellectual climate was much more mind-based. But I do think we are at a turning point, and we, I believe, do need to be making that switch, because it is, again, so important that we embrace art for these reasons. I've also been reading a great book on the topic, which is called Your Brain on Art. And again, it's such an incredible thing what they're finding, how the brain responds to when you're creating art. And I've always pushed back when people say, well, I'm not talented for music, or I don't have a musical bone in my body, or I'm tone deaf. I think that's not true. I think everybody is created musically, and we have music running through our bodies. Each and every organ in our body has a certain sound, a certain frequency. Our ear is made up. I've heard that in the cochlea we have all these tiny little hairs. Each one of them is programmed to a frequency. We are responding to sound. We are transporters of sound. We are inhabitors of sound. Some people say we were created from sound. Our DNA, if we were to flatten it out and see it as an encoding, we would see it that it actually creates a melody, and no 2 melodies are the same. So everybody's DNA code is its own beautiful song. In the hustle and bustle of modern life, finding balance and inner peace can seem like an elusive dream. But what if the key to harmony has been within us all along, resonating through the ages? Introducing the transformational power of Heaven's Melody, a downloadable audio track of the 7 ancient solfeggio healing frequencies paired with biblical scriptures. These powerful sound waves, used by ancient civilizations for thousands of years, are known to promote physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. From reducing stress and anxiety to enhancing focus and creativity, these frequencies harmonize with your body's natural rhythms, bringing a profound sense of calm and clarity. You have probably heard do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or do a deer, a female deer, and might have thought that those are just syllables without meaning. For a long time, I thought it was just gibberish until I found out that each of those syllables, do, re, mi, and so on, are tied to the Latin, and each of them have a spiritual significance. For instance, the third one, mi, stands for miracles and transformation, and it is linked to the frequency 528, known for its restorative effects. I have been using that frequency for over 10 years, and I could truly attest there have been some amazing healing miracles that I have seen happen with those. And countless people have downloaded this throughout the world. And I have a ton of testimonials of people that have seen great benefits. Experience the benefits of improved sleep, reduced pain, and a deeper connection to your inner self. Be confident that the sounds you are hearing support your faith as you steep in the pure frequency merged with the power of scriptural word. Feel the ancient vibrations cleanse your mind, body, and spirit, rejuvenating you from within. To listen, learn, and download, visit musictocomposeyou.com/heavenmelody. So to wrap up this episode, we talked about music meaning and danger, why some people go to great lengths to protect it. We also talked about how to listen deeply, inner listening, and how that positively impacts everything in our life. So the ways we can listen deeply is simply start with this one exercise, which is one I do a lot, and it's very, very clarifying. Sit in a room or wherever you are, in a car, whatever, and just be aware of the sounds around you. It's so simple, but it's so interesting how we don't really take inventory of the sounds that are around us. And you'll be surprised. Sometimes I sit in a room and I think it's very quiet in that room, but the more I listen, the more I hear little things. Like it could be a little hum of a refrigerator 2 rooms down, or the air conditioning noise. And so silence is very hard to find these days, true silence. But simply touching base with your ear, sitting really deeply listening to and connecting to the sounds in your environment is a good first step. And the ear simply needs to be peaked, like exercised, on alert mode. You know how dogs are so alert and their ears are directed whenever they hear a sound, right? So our ears have to also get to that level of alertness. And then once we have that, we can be more tuned in and listen to when people speak, listening not only to the words they say, but how they express themselves, the tone of voice, the enunciation, and really appreciating that which you are intaking, resisting the impulse to speak, but always going a little bit deeper into the listening. And just at that uncomfortable point, it's funny, usually there's even more that is revealed by listening. So that is one suggestion, how to start the deeper listening experience. And then when you listen to music, like for instance, the third movement of the Ninth Symphony that we're going to hear in a couple moments, listening to the different entrances of the instruments, listening to that legato, which is that smooth connection between the notes, feeling how connecting, how it makes you feel, all those different notes, and also listening to certain melodic ideas. They get introduced and repeated, and the tension and release of the harmonies. So I have really enjoyed this foray into the revelation theory that Beethoven had. And on next week's episode, we are going to go even deeper. And this time we're going to start unpacking deeper things at the piano. So some of the things we'll talk about is why we find some certain sounds and combinations of chords in music beautiful. And that is the concept of aesthetic emotion, which is another aspect to our study. We'll also talk about why some songs make us cry and others dance. There's actually formulas in place. What do composers do to elicit those feelings? Also, is there an implied code composers had to generate feelings, and how does that work? And that is something called the law of the affects. And so we'll be talking about that, which is super fascinating. And I will also share my story about not really understanding Beethoven and how one piano lesson changed all that for good. It's a story that I think you'll enjoy. So, without further ado, I want to thank you for listening. And here is the third movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, conducted by Herbert von Karajan. Thank you for listening to the Music to Compose You podcast. This is a weekly broadcast where we explore the intersection of classical music and wellness. Please visit musictocomposeyou.com for more information, and while you're there, be sure to scoop up some of the free resources there, including Sound Sleep, a special playlist with music designed to help you relax. And also feel free to explore my extensive playlist on Spotify with classical music targeted for different health and wellness aspects. Thank you so much for being along on this journey, and look forward to continuing the exploration next week. Bye now.